there is a rapidly growing awareness about mental health issues, and thankfully you can find hundreds, if not thousands of books and videos online that will discuss symptoms and how to manage them, and in some cases even how to recover. However, what is not really widely spoken about is how mental health issues are created in the first place. So where exactly do these issues come from? So I noticed that the most commonly discussed causes of mental health issues are chronic stress and trauma, which I find is very true. However, the real issue is whether people are even aware that they're experiencing chronic stress or have experienced trauma, and whether they're aware of the symptoms that they are experiencing to recognize that they have mental health issues. So if you're new to this channel, my name is Rumzi and I share my insights, knowledge and experience on how I recovered from various mental health issues over the past 10 years, including things like depersonalization, depression, anxiety, video game addiction, internet addiction, and also maladaptive daydreaming. So if you're interested in those kind of videos, I highly recommend checking out this channel. Also, click the like button if you find this useful and hit the subscribe button to be notified when I release the next video. So I made this video because what I noticed was, even before the events of 2020 and now 2021, I noticed there were so many people that have mental health issues and seem to be completely unaware of it. And I was able to recognize this because in my own journey of recovery from these mental health issues, you start to notice patterns and you start to see other people's behavior and you realize, that was like the past version of me, and these are the issues that I had and I didn't recognize at the time, and now I can see it reflected in others. So for example, they may have anxiety, they may have depression or certain addictions, and yet when you speak to them, you realize they are completely unaware of it and they don't even recognize these symptoms. So really the question is, how is this possible? How can people be in the middle of mental health issues and not recognize it? And I myself was one of these people. I was so deep in mental health issues like about between 5 to 10 years ago, and yet I myself couldn't even recognize it. And of course, because I didn't recognize it, I didn't seek help, and I didn't look further into the symptoms, and I didn't start questioning them. It was only when things got really, really bad and I started hearing different people say the same things to me, and I started having the same experiences repeated over and over again in different environments and at different times, and then I started to realize, okay, things are getting so bad, I have to do something. So the question is, why did it take that long, and what was missing that didn't allow me and others to see that they have mental health issues and they need to do something about it? So I believe the first main reason is that these issues tend to grow gradually on us, so we don't notice how we are gradually declining. And what that means is that we don't see the symptoms creeping up on us. So these symptoms slowly tend to build up. And we humans are very good at adapting to different situations, and for better or worse, we're extremely good at it. So if you imagine, as an example, a frog that's put in a pot of water that's slowly heating up, that frog's body will be gradually, slowly but surely adapting to the temperature. So what that means is that because the temperature is changing so slowly, it won't even notice when the water is getting very, very hot, and it will probably be boiled alive and won't even realize it until it's too late. And this is effectively what happens with us as humans, because we are so good at adapting to change that if the change is slow and gradual enough, we will mentally, physically and emotionally adapt to that. And for better or worse, even if it's hurting us, we may not notice it. And this is really scary, because until we start getting feedback or recognizing feedback from others or our environment, we may just continue to decline and decline mentally or even physically and not even notice that it's happening. And this leads on to the next issue, which is all about self-awareness. So to actually recognize that we have these mental health issues and to recognize the symptoms, we need a certain amount of self-awareness, and not everybody actually has this. And self-awareness is really a skill that can be learned. So back when I was knee-deep in various mental health issues, So I had really severe anxiety, really bad depression, really strong dissociative symptoms with depersonalization. I've talked about this extensively on my other videos, so if you click a link up here, if you're interested in knowing more, you can check that out. I also was severely addicted to video games, the internet. I couldn't stop daydreaming, so I was just constantly what they would call maladaptive daydreaming all the time. And yet, despite that, I didn't think I needed help, and I thought that I was actually doing fine and that somehow I just figure out I didn't see the full scale of the problem. And unfortunately, even before the issues of 2020 and now 2021, I could see this happening to so many people where they couldn't, because they lacked the self-awareness, they hadn't developed this ability, and because their issues had gradually, slowly crept up on them, they couldn't recognize these issues and they also didn't think they needed help. But for me, this all changed once things got very bad, but then I did start to regularly go for therapy. But also I started mindfulness practices like meditation. This became a daily thing. And I focused on self-help and self-development practices as well, again, as a daily thing. And what this did was it really trains your mind to be able to recognize and perceive these issues as they're building up. And also you can really see the bigger picture of how bad things are so you can take the right action. Essentially, it trains you to be able to notice things about yourself that you couldn't see before. And yet, even then, somebody can still recognize that there's a problem. They can even recognize the full scope of the problem, but still not take action to solve it. So why is that? Because this is also something I realized I used to do back in the past. And this is because the deeper root of this is a self-worth issue. So someone can have lots of mental health issues, and it's likely that because of that they have low self-worth. And if somebody's self-worth is so low, they may not actually think that they deserve to get better. Now, for most people, this isn't something they're aware of. It's very subconscious, so it's very much going on in the back of their mind and they're not aware of it. But self-worth can be so low that it ends up going into self-hate. So it can be that people can end up unconsciously hating themselves so much that, unfortunately, then a part of them, this part that hates themselves, will unconsciously make them not want to get better. So they may start, let's say, making progress, and then they'll do something without realizing that sabotages their progress. And this is because that part of them essentially doesn't believe that they deserve to get better. And this can also lead to this idea of a secondary gain. So this part of them that doesn't want to get better, technically it's not a form of self-sabotage because they are probably still gaining something from it. So the self-hate in some way is giving them some kind of emotional payoff that still benefits them. So maybe, for example, that part of them that hates themselves may not want to recover because they feel it's somehow protecting them from something else. So if they recover, maybe there's some kind of risk there. And it would be different for everyone, so I can't give specific examples. And the other really disturbing thing that I don't think is really fully understood about mental health issues is if the people around you also have similar issues, then that just becomes normalized and it's even harder to recognize that there are issues. So as an example, let's say you're in a community that have depression, anxiety, maybe drink issues, maybe eating disorders, and let's say that's generally what most people have in the communities that you live in. That's just normal. So you don't even have, let's say, a standard of what good mental or physical well-being is, because your standard is already so low because of the people around you. And then even more terrifying, what I think is terrifying, is not just if it's normalized in a community, but if in a society, a particular action or behavior is normalized, but is actually a sign of poor mental health, then nobody recognizes it as a problem. And of course, if there's no societal standard of what good mental health and well-being is, then the problem never gets recognized and therefore the problem never gets resolved. And a good example I see is that you can have large groups of people who are depressed and they are anxious, and this is before 2020, I need to point out. This was something I saw was pretty obvious, that there were lots of people who are depressed and anxious, and yet when you speak to them, they don't see it as a problem because it's just a normal part of their life and they believe that's what life is. They don't recognize that there are people who do live happy and fulfilling lives. And this leads on to another issue, which is that I've noticed that when there is talk about mental health issues, the focus seems to be more on the problems that exist and symptoms themselves and how people manage them, but not really, the focus isn't really on recovery and how people recover and how recovery does exist. And the problem this creates is that it indirectly gives the impression that recovery doesn't really happen. It gives the impression that once you have a mental health issue, you could only manage it. But I'm telling you from living proof that these things you can recover from, at least things I experienced. And this leads to a fear around talking openly about mental health issues. It leads to a stigma which still exists. So I think this is because if people start talking about mental health issues, it's almost like people maybe assume that there's something inherently wrong with that person and they cannot recover from it. Because when we talk about physical health issues, we know there are so many things you can recover from. And because there is a fear and a stigma about talking openly about mental health issues, this means nobody really discusses it, which means that the problems aren't recognized, which means that it's even harder for people to recognize if they themselves have those kind of symptoms. And so all of the things I've mentioned lead to a wide issue of there being very common mental health issues that people experience and are widespread, and yet because nobody's talking about it openly enough and they don't recognize the symptoms and they don't recognize their own mental health problems, and these issues become normalized, then it becomes a societal problem that is never solved and just gets worse over time. And because this isn't widespread knowledge, this means that even when people are presented with solutions, I find people can be very skeptical about it. So if you say, yes, I've recovered from anxiety, depression, depersonalization, different types of addictions, that kind of thing. If people have had these issues for a long time and they've never heard of such a thing because socially they're used to hearing more about the problem itself and just the management, they just don't believe that it's possible, which makes it even harder for them to recover. Or what I find is even worse is when people don't recognize they have mental health issues, and when a solution is presented or when information about their problem is presented to them, they don't even think it's relevant to themselves. So the problem just continues. So thanks for watching. If you thought this video was useful, click the like button and hit the subscribe button to be notified of when I release the next video. And let me know in the comments what you think about this video. Let me know your experiences with gaining more self-awareness to recognize what issues you had, and let me know how you're doing in terms of your recovery. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.